Six Invitational 2022 playoffs day number 3. We have 4 games to go over today, 2 in the upper bracket and 2 in the lower bracket. Team Liquid versus TSM was the first upper bracket match. The community prediction was only slightly in favor of Team Liquid, which is a little bit surprising given how dominant Liquid had been up to this point, but not that surprising actually when you consider how popular TSM is. They usually get more votes than maybe they actually deserve, but TSM has been quite good in brackets so far, and they've also been quite good against LATAM teams in general, and their LATAM killing streak does not end here. They 2-0 Team Liquid, a bit of a shock. I mean, some amount of people thought that TSM would win, and of course represented here, but some of these people probably just wanted TSM to win. Okay, so let's look at the maps 8-6 and 8-6, so about as undecisive as a 2-0 can get, but a 2-0 nonetheless. We've seen quite a lot of 8-6s. I feel like maybe not far more, but I feel like more 8-6s than we've seen 8-7s, and also more than a lot of other scorelines probably. Okay, so taking a look at how the maps went down, Liquid wins the first round on Chalet, and then TSM gets 2 more for Liquid, 1 more for TSM, puts it at a 3-3 half. Liquid gets the next round, TSM gets the next round, followed by 2 more, putting them up on map point. Then Liquid answers back with 2 more to send it to overtime. And then in overtime, TSM gets 2 rounds to secure the map in round 14 without needing a 15th round. And then we go to Bank, see the same scoreline, but in order to get there, we see a round win by TSM, a round win by Liquid, TSM, Liquid, Liquid. They go up 4-2 on their defensive half of Bank, which is quite good. And then we go to the other side where TSM is defending. TSM gets a round, they get another round. The score is now tied up 4-4. This is off the back of a 1v2 Geo Castle clutch. Liquid TSM, it's 5-5, and then TSM Liquid, we go to overtime once again, and once again TSM takes the first 2 rounds of overtime to secure the map, and they secure the series, and they secure a top 3 finish at SI 2022. So very impressive. TSM is perhaps the best performing, the most consistent performing team in the world at SIs. I don't recall if they were at SI 2019. I'm not sure if they were a team yet, but I don't think they were. At SI 2020, they got, 3rd place, and then 2021, they got 4th place, and now here they are getting at least 3rd place with potential to get 2nd or 1st. A decent chance for TSM to win the thing, which I'm sure a lot of people will be quite happy with. Looking at the stats, it was Bolo that popped off here, almost a 2 KD. He goes plus 15, good on entry, and the team was excellent on entry overall. As you can see, nobody going negative. The only person going positive on entry on Liquid was PSK, with just probably 2 incidental entry kills. And, Bolo's KPR, great. And then everyone else on TSM with pretty middling kind of stats, pretty good from Achieve, maybe slightly lackluster by Chala, but solid performances by everyone there. And then when we look at Liquid, Ask and PSK, we're sort of struggling, and Palu and Nesk, for Palu and Nesk's standards, I would say we're struggling, with the resets doing pretty well. It was fairly tight match, I guess, overall, with 2 overtime games. TSM only won 4 more rounds than Liquid actually won, but looking at some of the stat line here, you might think it was a little bit more, especially the whole entry thing. TSM was smoking them in that department, especially Merc. Nice 9-2. He's been really impressive this tournament, I guess, and his rating not super impressive here, but 9-2, that is sort of a crazy stat line with only 7% survival. That's one of the lowest we've seen, and probably maybe it's the lowest survival we've seen from a team that ended up winning the series. I'm not sure, but all right, let's move on to that other upper bracket game. Team Empire versus Sonics. About 2/3 of voters were on the side of Empire here, and I think that makes sense. Empire just beat Sonics in the previous match they played. That was a little bit ago, being, I believe, the first game of these guys' groups for each of them, and, well, Sonics looked like they probably should have won it. It was a bit of a comeback. They were up 1-0 on maps, and they were up 6-3 in that second map, allowed Team Empire to come back and then win even the 3rd map on them. Quite unfortunate, but then it seemed like their play was improving. They were tightening up. They even had a similar reversal against another team in bracket here. And so, I mean, I personally thought Sonics might do it. I wasn't sure. I did predict them, but that could have been some NA bias coming through, which, I mean, some amount. And yeah, the community prediction seems to indicate that Empire were, in fact, the favorites. They take it 2-1, and, well, a close-ish series, even though it does end with a 7-0 So a couple of 8-6s, the same thing as the previous series. This is 4 8-6s in a row on the day, with 2 in the first match and then 2 here, but then we break the mold with a 7-0. That was kind of tough to watch, really. All right, so we go on to Coastline first. Team Empire takes the first 4 rounds on defense. That's a big deal. And then especially on Coastline, which I believe is now the most attacker-sided map at the event, and I think we will look at map stats today. We'll look at that later. Sonics gets the last 2 to salvage the half. Going 4-2 for Empire is still good, but not insurmountable for the Sonics, as we will see. Big Rexon 1v3 clutch here in round 7, and then Empire stays ahead. Don't allow Sonics to tie up the game just yet. Empire's up 5-3, and they go up 6-3, and we've seen this many times. We see Sonics win 1, 2, 3, and another 6-3 comeback is in the cards because Sonics do win the 2 overtime rounds. So 5 rounds in a row to come back from 6-3 to 8-6. This is like the 5th or 6th, or I don't know. We've seen this numerous times in this tournament so far, for whatever reason. And then we go on to Clubhouse, and starts out with a action pack on a round, ending with a clutch. Team Empire take the first round, and then second round Sonics, third round Sonics, 2 more for Empire, make it 3, 4-2 attacking half for Empire. On Clubhouse is pretty good. Clubhouse is maybe tied for the most defensive sided, if I remember right when I was looking at the stats, but again, we'll look at it at the end. Sonics get 2 more rounds, bring it to a 4-4. Empire Sonics, 5-5. Sonics Empire, and an action-packed round here as well, ending with a super 1v2 clutch. So we are going to overtime once again, but this time it is Empire that closes it out. So a little 3 win streak at the end of the map to secure the map for themselves. And then, well, I mean, you know, it's going to be here 7 in a row for Empire. They run it up on defense. By the time they got like 3 or 4, I was thinking it was going to be really hard for Sonics to come back, but still possible. And then once Empire got the 5th round, and especially the 6th round, I mean, you just know it's over. You're not going to the other side and winning 6 in a row on Villa. I mean, of course, maybe it is possible, but just as decisive as it was, and as decisive as the scoreline is, void of any context, it's just so unlikely. And so yeah, it didn't happen. Empire just simply wins their first attack once they switch sides, and they do win that map and series. So yeah, Empire looks just better and better by the day, really. I mean, I guess they beat Space Station more decisively, but we do end up seeing a 7-0 here against the Sonics. So Empire, of course, conquering NA, it would seem. And this pretty well assures us that we're going to have 2 different teams in the teams from 2 different regions in the grand final. And I guess we'll talk about that when we actually look at the bracket. We have a couple more matches to cover. And before that, even, we have some stats. Rexon really popping off here. Grixer still doing, you know, fairly well, just +5, but compared to his performance this tournament, nothing too spectacular. But Rexon here, you know, pretty good. +11, +5 on entry, over a 2.0 on entry, good cost, KPR, all this stuff. And then Yeti, Super, Kansan, all sort of suffering statistically. And then it ends up being a Shepard on top. So anyways, he goes +13. He goes -1 on entry, but whatever. He was just in 1 incidental. Entry engagement, very high cost, KPR, all the stuff on Thermite and Smoke mainly, mind you. And then Joystick, always Dan with positive ratings, and only Scyther going a little bit below 1 and a little bit negative. Nothing too insane, but here's the Habana, I guess, even to make you feel a little bit better about it. Okay, so let's move down to the lower bracket for the next match. Oxygen versus MIBR. About 3/4 of voters thought Oxygen was gonna take this, and that makes it look like they're pretty well the heavy favorite, and I really don't think that they were. I think that maybe MIBR is just an unpopular or unrecognized team, and Oxygen is a pretty popular team, but I'm not sure why so many people thought that Oxygen was gonna take this. I did end up voting for them, but I knew it was a bit of a hopeful prediction. I was going NA hopeful, but MIBR has probably looked better than Oxygen has in bracket. Yes, Oxygen has looked pretty solid in the lower bracket, but we can't forget about their drubbing at the hands of FaZe in the upper bracket, their first game of bracket. They did beat Damwon, which was impressive, and they beat Eminem pretty handily, but MIBR also knocked out the reigning world champions in Ninjas in Pajamas, and then they knocked out the former world champions in Space Station, and they barely did that, of course. That was just down to a 1-round margin at the very end, round 15 on map 3. But yeah, all of this to say that I don't think it should have been like heavily in favor of Oxygen, maybe like split down the middle, but I think MIBR was even advantage, you know, given all this stuff, and the most important thing being that MIBR just beat Oxygen in groups, right? So yeah, I think MIBR underrated coming into this, and I think underrated at all points in this tournament, really. They got 3rd place at the last SI. They haven't done anything internationally since then, but they did have struggles in that one of their players had an injury and was forced to either not play or play with the controller, and well, they selected play with the controller, so they really suffered because of this fact, and they probably would have been going to the majors and doing decently had that not happened. So, I mean, maybe people just aren't aware of that, but yeah, I think MIBR super underrated coming into this whole thing. So 7-2, 7-2, one of the biggest beatdowns we've seen in the tournament, and is this maybe the biggest beatdown we've seen in bracket? Of course, Oxygen had a 7-1, 7-2 in groups against Na'Vi, and then I think somebody had like a 7-3, 7-0 against somebody else. But so we had a couple of matches where a team only got 3 rounds, and then we see Oxygen only getting 4 rounds. So it doesn't get any less close than this. I guess it could be double 7-0s, but this is pretty close to double 7-0s. MIBR take a round, Oxygen, MIBR, Oxygen, and then MIBR just went out with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rounds in a row, ending with a reduct clutch, and Oxygen looking kind of lost. In the past, Oregon was, I think, generally their best map. Maybe it hasn't been at this event, but Oxygen is generally really strong on Oregon. Also really strong on Coastline, but they get 7-2'd here just the same. 1v1 clutch by Lucid gets MIBR the first round. Oxygen gets a round, MIBR, MIBR. MIBR, 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 or excuse me, Oxygen finally get around here. But at this point, MIBR is up, I think, 5-2, I think, after this round. And so one more round by MIBR will put them on match point. They get it. And then just another round to close it out. Yeah, another 7-2. Oxygen goes out a bit disgracefully, but maybe MIBR low-key is on their way to win this tournament. We'll have to see. All right, looking at the stats here. Lucid, Reduct, Wraps, all heavy green, and then Falls and Philippox just lagging behind a bit in terms of being below 1.0. I guess a fairly wide margin between Wraps and Falls here. And then everyone kind of falling a little bit short on Oxygen, Yaga, Vertical, Foxe, Kino, and Laxing way at the bottom here. You usually don't see Laxing's stats suffering this hard. That's Oxygen going home, and that leaves us with just one more match to talk about. Dark Zero versus FaZe Clan. I felt like this going into the day was the most lopsided matchup, and that is the matchup where one team was pretty likely to beat the other. The community didn't actually agree because only 62% of voters here for FaZe, whereas it was, you know, we just saw like 75% for Oxygen or whatever it was, and 65% for Empire. But yeah, I did think that of all of the teams playing today, Dark Zero was going to have the biggest uphill battle. And that's not actually what ended up happening with how big of a blowout MIBR versus Oxygen was, but it was pretty close. Still a decisive 2-0, 7-3 on Clubhouse, and a 7-5 on Cafe. FaZe didn't really ever look like they were losing control of this match, even though they, you know, maybe lost control of a handful of rounds, but 14-8 in terms of round count. And okay, FaZe takes the very first round. Cyber gets a big 4K to kick off Clubhouse. 2 for Dark Zero, and then 2 for FaZe back. 1 more for Dark Zero gives us a 3-3 half. And then when we switch sides, FaZe Clan, FaZe Clan, FaZe Clan, they're up 6-3. Will they choke it? They will not. They will just close it out with a little disable here in round 10, winning 7-3. And then when we go to Cafe, Dark Zero gets the first round, FaZe Clan gets 3, Dark Zero 1, FaZe Clan 1. We switch sides. Dark Zero gets around, and then we see a couple by FaZe, 2 by Dark Zero, and then Dark Zero needs 1 more round to secure it, or to secure overtime rather, and FaZe ends up getting it. So a little bit of a heartbreaker maybe for Dark Zero. They seem like they could maybe make a bit deeper of a run into the tournament with how improved their play was, but FaZe was just too sharp of an opponent and took them down. And I guess at this point it feels like anyone could win this tournament. It could be MIBR, and maybe they're still the dark horse of the tournament. Liquid surprisingly fell out of upper bracket, but it's entirely possible they run it back. Same thing with FaZe getting knocked into the lower bracket by Liquid earlier, and then Sonics, Empire, TSM, all of them as well. I could see anyone that is left winning this tournament reasonably. And then taking a look at the stats, Cyber popping off here as he tends to do with Cameraman, Souls, Astro, Bullet all pretty tightly clustered above 1.0. Hyper being the best performer for Dark Zero in this match, but nothing spectacular. Eclipse doing all right, and then Pamzu, Canadian, and JR suffering pretty similarly to each other in terms of rating, with only a 0.06 rating divide among them. And right, so I guess that's the last match. We'll run through the bracket and then briefly look at some stats, and we'll call it a day. Yeah, this will be a much shorter video, I suppose. Only 4 to cover today, and then tomorrow's a break day, and then we have 2 more matches per day over the course of 3 days. So 2 and 2 and 2, and again, we'll look at that in the bracket. So let's move over there. All right, here is the remainder of the bracket. The 4 matches we just played today were these 2 and these 2, and so we now have our top 6, which are TSM, Empire, Liquid, MIBR, Sonics, and FaZe. And if we count them all up here, we have 6 matches left to play. So we have these 2, and then these 2, and these 2. And I guess the order we're playing them in is, so today is Wednesday, tomorrow we have a break, that's Thursday, and then on Friday we're gonna see Liquid versus MIBR. This is at 8 o'clock Eastern, so the stream is starting like 4 or 5 hours later than it had been. So if you weren't able to watch the first matches, whatever, you might be able to catch them now. So again, this is at 8, and then this game, same day, but this starts at 1 o'clock. So there's some amount of gap in between these 2 games, and then those are the only 2 games for the day. And then on Saturday, we have TSM versus Empire. This also starts at 8 Eastern. And then we will see the lower bracket semifinals. So this will be played between the winner of Team Liquid and MIBR and Sonics and FaZe Clan, and that'll also be at 1 o'clock Eastern. But again, this is on Saturday. And then finally, on Grand Final Sunday at 8 a.m., we will see the lower bracket final, 8 a.m., and then the Grand Final, which is played at about 1:30. On Saturday and Sunday, I think they're doing reveals. One of them, they're doing the roadmap, and one they're doing the season reveal. I don't recall which one is which, but I think it's between the matches on either day. But again, on Saturday and Sunday, they will be doing these 2 reveals, which should be cool to watch. Hopefully a lot of people will pay attention, and hopefully they show some cool stuff. So let's talk about matches and maybe a few predictions and whatever. Okay, so yeah, like I already went over, Liquid got 2 out by TSM, a bit surprising. Empire beat Sonic, so my predictions are a bit in shambles for the day. I got 3 of the 4 wrong, but honestly, I probably could have got 3 of the 4 right if I had not been NA biased. I still would have gone with Liquid, I'm sure, because of how good they were looking, but I thought TSM might take it down, especially with their LATAM defeating streak that they're on, where they beat NiP here, and then they beat Furia here, and so they were going on to fight another LATAM team. They beat Furia in groups as well, so several LATAM teams defeated. Yeah, so a little bit of a shocker there. Empire versus Sonics. Yeah, I mean, maybe I would have gone with Empire if I wasn't just going for the NA teams when I shouldn't. But so a little bit of a surprise, I'd say, or no, not even a surprise. I think Empire probably were the favorites, but I think it was pretty equal. They did have a close match in the previous one that they played, and they both look pretty solid, with Sonics being probably a bigger surprise to make it to this point, especially given that Empire was the 1st seed and Sonics were a 3rd seed or whatever. Okay, and then down here rather, Oxygen versus MIBR. Like I said, I'm surprised that people were considering Oxygen the heavy favorite in this. I thought MIBR was they were about equal, or even MIBR was the favorite, especially given their history. So, I mean, MIBR beat Oxygen at this tournament, and then I believe they also beat them at the previous 6 Invitational, which, again, was like 9 months ago, so doesn't have the biggest bearing, but given that, in combination with them beating them here, yeah, I just thought that MIBR would probably win, but again, I did predict Oxygen, so maybe that was my even most foolish one. I said, hopefully MIBR won't make me look foolish again, but indeed they did. And then FaZe does beat Dark Zero here, so that's the one I did get right for the day. TSM versus Empire. This one's hard to call. There were some shocks and whatever before, but this is the one which I find the most difficult to call thus far, I'd say. Maybe not. Maybe there's 1 or 2, but I think it might be the hardest to call. They both look pretty good. But, I mean, nail in the coffin already. I'll probably just stick with NA teams. I wouldn't say I'm a TSM hater, but I am a bit anti-TSM just as far as watching NAL and whatever. They're usually one of the teams that I'll root against, and not for any particular reason. They all seem like perfectly nice gentlemen and whatnot, but maybe it's just because they're the most popular team, so it's easiest to root against them, with them being the anti-underdog and whatnot. But and then also Empire, they're probably my favorite European team, and maybe my favorite non-NA team overall. I don't really watch much APAC or even that much LATAM, and then so from EU, I sort of arbitrarily picked Empire at some point, and well, because maybe I like their playstyle and this and that. And okay, so I'll go with TSM, I guess. I'll stay behind NA, but also with TSM defeating Liquid fairly handily, defeating the team that up to that point looked like the tournament favorite, I will give it to TSM. Empire had to go 3 maps versus Oxygen, and well, I guess we're rocking with it. So Liquid versus MIBR. Liquid still looked quite excellent, only falling to TSM, and MIBR's had their struggles. They did destroy Oxygen, but they were 1 round away from being eliminated by Space Station, and they did handle NIP pretty well as well. But their group was a little bit hit and miss. They didn't do that much worse than anyone else in the group besides Damwon. There was a whole tying and whatnot. But yeah, I'll give it to Liquid. But I'm fully prepared for MIBR to defy my prediction once again. And then Sonics versus FaZe Clan. God, I feel like FaZe are the favorites here, but I'm not gonna start predicting against Sonics now. I'll go with Sonics. I'm hopeful for them to win, but this is also similar to the Auction MIBR situation, where I do feel like FaZe Clan is probably the favorites, but Sonics have surprised us several times at this tournament already, and I'm hoping for them to do the same. So indeed, I will remain NA hopeful. Yeah, you caught me. Guilty as charged. So we will see two different region teams in the grand final unless TSM and Sonics make it. So we only have 1 European team left, so of course there can only be 1, and then we only have LATAM teams left in the lower bracket. So the only way to get to the grand final is by having 1 team get there from the upper bracket, 1 from the lower bracket, and since NA is the only region with a representative in the upper and lower bracket, they're the only region that could possibly face each other in the grand final, and that'd be exciting. Maybe not the most exciting, actually. It's a little bit lame seeing one region play, to see an intra-regional matchup in the grand final. Just, like it kind of was a little bit lame, I gotta admit, last year when we saw NIP versus Liquid. I mean, it was a good match and all, but I mean, you kind of want to see 2 different regions going head to head. And right, so I guess that's pretty much all for the bracket. I went over the times and I went over the predictions. Hopefully I don't get made a fool. I was doing pretty well on predictions early on, and now they're falling apart just a little bit, but maybe I'm getting my hopes up a bit too much. Okay, so good games ahead, shorter days ahead, hoping for that reveal to be super sick. And while I'm talking like the video's over, but it's not. We have just a little bit to go over in terms of stats, so let's take a look at that. Stay tuned if you're interested. All right, I'm going to try to keep this brief today. We're just going to look at the player stats leaderboards. We're going to skip over the full stats, and then we'll look at the map stats as well. So Grixer on top in rating and KD. So Nesk has been surpassed as the tournament leader, I guess. Grixer second in entry, putting him also above Nesk, who has fallen off of the entry because he went like -5 or something on the day in entry, and Grixer went +1 or something. Merc, pretty spectacular in terms of entry, by far the best in the tournament. At this point, he might end the tournament as the best in entry, and well, I mean, he could get up to, I mean, like +40 or whatever. He still has at least 2 matches to play. Nesk remains in second place here, Palu in third here, NJR Rexon, so actually identical rating and KD rankings. And then who else do we have on here? Alamau, who is out of the tournament, might be surpassed by somebody else. Folt's also out, so 2 players that are potentially going to be surpassed. If Nesk starts doing well again, he'll probably climb back up here. And Pambazoo also out of the tournament, so I mean 3 players that have potential to be passed because they won't be getting any more entry kills. Palu on top of Koss, Bride up here as well, Shepard, Nesk, Grixer. So we see Grixer does appear on all 4, and I think he's the only one that appears on all 4 of these, right? Palu's not on this one, Nesk isn't on this one as well, and then yeah, it looks like he's the only one up there. Woogieman still leads the tournament in clutches, but he's already been eliminated, but so has Prano, so has Rampy, so has Eclipse, so Kanzan currently in the best position to catch or pass him up. And then Plants, Skies might end the tournament on the most plants. He won't be getting any more, but neither will Eclipse, and so maybe Super, Geo, or Ask, one of them could pass, but it is a fairly wide margin. Okay, so let's take a look at the map stats. Okay, so we've seen a lot of shifting since the last time we looked at it. The now most attacker-sided map is Coastline by a decent bit. The other 2 attacker-sided maps are Bank and Chalet, and that's normal. Villa, Oregon, Cafe, and Clubhouse are the 4 more defender-sided maps, and the 2 most are Clubhouse and Villa. A little bit surprising for Clubhouse because at one time, I think it was the most attacker-sided at 40%, and so let's run through these really quickly. Cafe, everything is around 50%, with reading dining sort of surprisingly being the worst, and mining dining sort of surprisingly being the best. Maybe if it got a little bit more play, it would fall down a little bit, and probably it's the highest because teams are least familiar with attacking it. On Oregon, Laundry Supply is the best site here, and one of the best sites overall. I think maybe the only one that's better is Church Arsenal on Clubhouse, and Trophy Statue is equally as one at 61% as well. And this site makes sense. There's no way to do top-down play because all of the floor is hard. You can't breach it with Buck or Sledge or breach charges or anything like that. The only way you can look down into the objective is through hatches, I guess. I mean, technically staircase as well, but you know what I'm saying. And so that makes it pretty strong in this meta where grenades from under are super important. So bottom floors are good, but then bottom floors usually mean that you can get top-down angles, but that's not the case on this objective, unlike some other bottom floor objectives. Dorms Kids is actually the worst. Some teams are now favoring Meeting Hall Kitchen over it, and Kitchen Dining still is less preferred than Meeting Hall Kitchen as a tertiary site, even though, again, sometimes this is a secondary site and Dorms Kids is made the tertiary. Teams have sort of just figured it out, and again, it is favorable to attack in this meta because you can buck from below, you can grenade from below, and again, also it's pretty played out, but Laundry Supply also played out, just doesn't have those weaknesses that I mentioned. And then Clubhouse, one of the most defensive-sided maps. This has come a long way. All of these sites, I think all 3 of these sites have improved. This site might have even fallen. I feel like it might have been more defender-sided at one point, but Church Arsenal is now the most defensible site at 64% on all maps. And one of the most played, I guess Laundry Supply is 127, and yeah, it might actually be, it looks like it's the second most played site in the entire event. Master Gym actually being the second most won defender site in terms of percentages, and Cache CCTV still suffering a bit. This site's definitely been figured out. It is quite precarious once that wall gets opened, and it's not that hard to open the wall. So once you lose that, and then maybe your power position of Garage, it's pretty easy for the attackers to take advantage of, and that's reflected here. Bar Stage maybe doing better than it should actually be doing. Attackers don't know the best way to attack it, but maybe also the defenders don't know the best way to defend it yet, and so maybe it could go up, maybe it could go down, hard to say. Bank, everything is now below 50%. Lockers and top floor are both at 49%. Lockers still seems to be the most favored, even though attackers have a very clear way to exploit the objective, but teams are pretty good at wasting time, so that when teams go for that default plant, C4 and smokes and whatever, will be able to run the clock down to 0. Open Area Kitchen, the second most preferred site in terms of number of times played. And then Villa, also 55% defensive rate, just like Clubhouse, with Aviator and Trophy being 2 of the stronger defender sites in the game. Kitchen Dining not being that bad, 53%, and the Living Library being, it looks like, the worst defensive site, only 2 out of 15 wins, or 2 out of 13 wins or something like that, or is it 3, whatever it is. However you get that 15%. And so, yeah, as long as you stick to these 3 sites, you're doing pretty well on Villa defensively, I suppose. Coastline takes back over that most attacker-sided map mantle, all of the sites being 50% or below. Penthouse being the best, but it's also the least played, so it's really hard to call if it's actually the best site. Kitchen Service, most played, and second most defender-sided. And, it sort of makes sense. Hookah Billiards is a super exposed site, as are all of the sites on this map. You can just literally walk in a door or a window or whatever, and you're just in the site. That's just the nature of Coastline. It'll stay attacker sided for the most part, I think, and unless it gets big sweeping changes. The pretty small change it had recently wasn't enough to make it heavily defender sided or anything. And then finally, Chalet, it was around 50%, and now it's a little bit below 50, with Bar Gaming being the best site, most played site. Master Office used to be the most played site for quite a while, but it's now easily the worst site. Wine Cellar is much better than it used to be for whatever reason. Maybe we're just at the point in the cycle where defenders are getting away with it because attackers are bad at attacking it because it was so rarely picked, and so maybe attackers will start to figure it out again and the win percentage will go down, or maybe defenders have finally just figured out how to defend it and it's actually relatively defensible. And then Kitchen Dining here, sort of in the middle of these 2 sites in terms of popularity, and a little bit below them in terms of win percentage. And I guess that pretty well does it Chalet being the least played, and then by even decent margin, 3 less plays, and then goes up 1, goes up 1, and then these are the 3 most popular by far, with a 5 pick margin between Clubhouse and Bank. And all right, so I guess that pretty well does it. Maybe this wasn't as brief as I would have liked, but I want to be at least a little bit comprehensive. So hopefully some good games coming up. I suppose only 6 more matches to be played. Hopefully those reveal panels are cool and interesting and good looking and whatever. And all right, with all that being said, I will catch you guys in the next video, which I might have out tomorrow. I'm not sure if I'll do a video tomorrow, but certainly Friday and Saturday, Sunday, I should have some amount of coverage for the days of play. All right, so catch you guys later.